Now, after looking at both Eastern and Western theories of translation, if we try to look at both at the same time, or if we try to compare them and see that how both have dwelled in their respective regions. First, when we look at the West, we see that the first important translation was a collection of Jewish scriptures that were translated into Greek in Alexandria between 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. The dispersed Jews had forgotten their ancestral language and they needed Greek versions of their scriptures. And that's why this significant translation was done in the early history. Then throughout the Middle Ages, Latin remained the language of the Western learned world. The 9th century Alfred the Great, King of Wessex in England, was far ahead in his time because he commissioned Anglo-Saxon translations of Bede's ecclesiastical history and Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. These were the vernacular works that got translated. Meanwhile, the Christian church frowned on even partial adaptations of St. Jerome's Vulgate of 384 CE, the standard Latin Bible. Coming to Asia, the spread of Buddhism led to a large-scale translation efforts that spanned over 1,000 years in Asia. The Tangut Empire was spatially efficient in doing such translations and exploiting then newly invented block printing with the full support of the government. And what were they? The contemporary sources describe the emperor and his mother personally contributing to the translation effort of such scriptures alongside different, sages of different nationalities were involved in doing such kind of translation. The Tanguts actually took more decades to translate volumes that had taken the Chinese centuries also to render. On the other hand, the large-scale efforts of translation were also under a process that were taken by Arabs. Having conquered the Greek world, they make Arabic versions of their philosophical and scientific works. And during the Middle Ages, some translations of these Arabic versions were translated into Latin in Spain. And such Latin translations of Greek and original Arab works of scholarship and science immensely helped in advancing the development of European intellecture. The historic trends in Western translation practice may be illustrated or explained on the basis of the example of translation into English language from different languages. So the first good quality translations into English were made in the 14th century. And there was a translator called Geoffrey Stocker who adopted from the Italian of Giovanni Boccaccio on his own Knight's Tale and different stories. and started a translation of the French language and completed a translation of Boethius from Latin. And he also founded and started an English poetic tradition on adaptations and translations from earlier established literary languages. So the first great English translation was Wycliffe Bible in 1382 that shown the weaknesses of an underdeveloped English prose as mentioned by many scholars of European literature and translation. So at the end of 15th century only, it was possible to start the great age of English prose translation with some significant translations from different other literary languages into English. Meanwhile, in Italy, because of Renaissance, a new period in the history of translation started. And a lot of literary work started getting translated into different other European languages. And the readers also demanded literature and different information and content in different European languages. And hence, a huge translation work can be seen on the cards during this time. On the other hand, non-scholarly literature continued to be adapted instead of getting translated by different scholars in Europe. Then the period of Elizabeth observed considerable progress beyond only paraphrase towards or adapting of work of a particular literary work. But even to the end of this period, which actually reached to the middle of the 17th century, there were not much concern seen related to the verbal accuracy while translating any work. So in the second half of the 17th century, the poet John Dryden sought to make the Virgil speak, wherein he would probably have written if he were living and an Englishman. So throughout the 18th century, the watchword of the translators were related to the ease of reading. Whatever they couldn't understand in the text, or whatever they thought that cannot be translated or cannot be understood by the readers, they simply omitted it from the translated work. And it was assumed that it's the translator's style of expression at the best. And at least there were translations. However, during this time, there were scholars who were now concerned about the complete translation or completeness of the translated work. So the 19th century got with it the new standards of accuracy, completeness, and style of translation. So if you look at the accuracy of translation, an unwritten policy was adopted. And that said that it has to be the complete text, the whole text, and nothing but the complete text. So there were few exceptions. However, it became the trend And in the advance of 20th century, some new patterns started getting set, wherein, for example, Benjamin Jowett translated Plato in very simple, straightforward language. And slowly, this was also understood by the translators and other scholars that by the end of the day, the target audiences who are going to read and understand this translated work need to understand, need to read these works, and hence ease of language and style is a need of the translation. And slowly, the styles that we see today, the formats that we see today, the kind of translation work as in a well-set system we see today started emerging. So in 1970s, you can see a literary approach to translation theory or translation as a discipline started getting emerged. And key elements of this new approach were seen in different popular writings and theorists and other scholars. So this entire history or the theories and different schools related to translation emerged from a long way and hence share a number of concerns. What we relate commonly to communication theory. Maybe the very important observation that communication theorists have produced or created or have come up with for translators in the recognition that every act of communication basically has three dimensions: the author or the speaker, the message itself, and the audience. So the more we know about the speaker or the author, the actual message produced by the author can be conveyed to the target audiences in the most accurate way. And this can be very useful for the translators. So assuming that in the act of communication that we are doing now, I am the speaker or the author, I have a decided message for you, and you are the target audiences. So what I'm intending to communicate is the most important thing. And my actual words, if at all they need to get translated into different language, they have to be translated in a way wherein my intended message doesn't get lost. And when these three dimensions are covered by the translator or the interpreter efficiently in a comprehensive way, the communication becomes efficient and accurate. So we looked at different theories that came up with different ideas about translation, of course, because of different historical contexts also, different cultural contexts also. But by the end of the day, they provide a base for translation to develop, to grow as a discipline. And because they also provide a step-by-step history of its development as a discipline, it basically clears the way for its future. Because to decide the future, we need to know the past. So it's not necessary, although, for everyone to know different theories and different contexts that have been popular in the history related to translation. But it's actually important to understand the pillars of translation, the very base of translation. And hence, when we translate something from one language to another language, we certainly observe, experience few challenges. And those challenges have been there since a long time, as observed not only when we see the history of translation, by different theories also. So these challenges need to be discussed in a holistic, comprehensive way. And we have to find a suitable solution for the same. So for example, when I explained you about the Western school of translation, we could see that there is a challenge related to the structure of language. So basically, depending on the structure or the grammar of a particular language, the structure of sentences in one language could be completely different from the other language. And while translation, the translator may find it difficult to convey the context or the intended message because of this issue. So for example, if you look at English, the adjective is always placed before the noun. But in French, it comes after the noun. In Arabic and other similar languages, the subject pronoun is a part of the verb. And it determines the subject's gender and voice of the sentence also. But in other languages, it is not the case. So that is why here at times the sentences need to be paraphrased, keeping the intended message in mind. And hence, the translator needs to be really well versed with the grammar of both languages, and accordingly can find out a solution while translating the particular content or the information. And also, depending on the type of translation, it can be taken over or sorted out. Then there is another very significant challenge that comes in the way of an efficient translation since long time, and it is related to the culture. So I'll repeat what I said in the beginning while defining the translation itself. So translation is not about just, changing the language. and just translating a word or a phrase or a sentence or a paragraph or a story or a novel or a poem from one language to another. It is also about efficiently conveying one culture, source culture, to another. That is the target culture. So the culture practiced by the author of source language could be completely vastly different from that of the target language. So we have colloquials, we have different items, we have different things that belong to or are specific to a particular culture only. And that makes the translator's task really difficult. So for example, if I'm referring to certain food items, such as bhakarwadi or dhokla, and somehow it's a very important part of my particular story, while translating it to another language, the translator has to be really careful that he or she cannot use some, nearby word of these particular nouns. So one way could be providing footnotes to such kind of words to make the reader aware or understand the culture of the source literature or the source author. Then, apart from the literal meaning of few things, it's also about the culture of the style of a particular way of writing popular in a particular country or region. So for example, Britishers are known for their dry sarcasm and their sense of humor that is portrayed in their literature also is different from the other places or other regions. So there are now two things that while translation, how this dry sarcasm has to be taken or conveyed to the target audiences. And the second important thing is, it might so happen that this kind of sarcasm or their different sense of humor may not be appreciated or liked by the target audiences or a different country where the culture is different. So for such kind of instances, for such kind of contexts, translators need to be very, very careful. They should be well versed, apart from the languages, about the cultures also of the source and target literature or content. So might so happen that the source writing contains some examples or some mentions wherein a particular animal is shown being eaten as a food item. And it could be completely unacceptable by the people belonging to the target or the translated language. So I would not say that the literal translation should not be done here, but the translators need to be cautious enough. Apart from these challenges, we have certain words or phrases that mean or have a different meaning. In one language, they have a completely different meaning in another language. So in English, we have a word or verb break. Now, Breakup is different from breakdown, which is different from break into, which is different from break in, which is different from break apart, which is different from break away. They all have different meaning, while the verb is common, which is break. So the appropriate word, the most appropriate word or the closest meaning word has to be decided by the translator while translating the work into the target language. Then there is another very common challenge. And for that also, scholars or experts or translators keep trying to find the solution. It's related to the words with several meanings at a time. So for example, in English language, some words are spelled alike, but they could have different meanings. On the other hand, some words have several meanings depending on the situation or the context or the sentence where they are being used. So for example, the word break again. So break a plate. Here, break has been used as a verb, and coffee break, which has a completely different meaning. So the translator has to be vigilant, careful enough to ensure that the right meaning of the word is conveyed, is used in the translated version. In today's times, when we have different new types of translation, for example, medical type of translation and multimedia translation and technical translation and business translation, the technical knowledge also poses a lot of challenges for the translators. So for example, in a financial document, it's not only about translating currencies as in the terms. The figures or the numbers that are mentioned with the particular currency also have to be changed when the currency changes. So the translator needs to be well aware about this fact while translating one financial document from one language to another language. In a technical document, depending on the industry, the meaning of an abbreviation or an acronym or a jargon could be completely different from the same abbreviation or jargon or acronym used in a different kind of or type of technical document. So for all such kind of challenges, the translators need to belong to the particular industry to ensure that they use the accurate meaning or translation of the not only the word but the entire content or the information. And that is the reason why I said that despite having different softwares and machine form of translation available for us, we need to have human translators and we need to take a look personally, I mean, as in the experts for the particular type of translation after it gets translated. So for example, it is highly suggested, recommended by experts that as in when a legal document or a judicial document or information is translated into another language, a judicial or legal expert or professional has to look at the translated version. because accuracy is the most needed objective in such kinds of translation. So we have challenges, but we have come through a long way when we look at the history and different theories of translation. It is an ever evolving, ever emerging field wherein every day some new discoveries, experiences, and best practices keep getting added to the field of translation. And certainly, in understanding the very intent of translation, different types of translation, its history, what have been different challenges, what could be the possible solution, and most importantly, what could be the future of translation, the theories play a very significant role. So in today's lecture, this is what we have tried to do. We have tried to cover different regional theories that are studied as the core theories or core regional theories to understand translation as a discipline. On that note, I would now like to stop and thank you all for patiently listening to my lecture today on different regional theories of translation. Thank you so much.